Hello, Rick from Finca Casanga in Boquete, Panama. My helper today is Karma. She's not very helpful, but she's hanging out with us. Today we're going to talk about roasting coffee. Um, a lot of stuff happens before we get to the point of roasting, and roasting coffee is still more art than science. You see a lot of really high-end, especially Italian roasters that have computers and graphs and charts, and that's fine. But we live in Panama, and the power doesn't always work, and it tears up electronic devices. And so this is our roaster. This is the farm roaster. Um, it's not very impressive for people that roast coffee for a living, but for us, this is the perfect machine. Um, Getting a roaster of this size to Panama, um, a good one especially, could easily be 25, 30,000 US. It's expensive. We got lucky and we found an old broken one, homemade coffee roaster, and we were able to buy it and fix it. And this is what we've been roasting with for the last several years. It's not fancy. The only display shows temperature in the drum, um, but that's fine for what we do. One of the advantages that we have is we're really only roasting our own coffee, which makes life a little bit easier for the roaster, who is not me. I'm not a great coffee roaster. My wife roasts coffee for the farm. Um, Her preference is to be on the other side of the camera. So I'm going to teach you about roasting today. But for us, this is perfect because it's decidedly low tech. And if something breaks on this, I don't have to try and get a part from China or Italy. We can probably weld and fabricate whatever part it takes to make this continue working. And we've done that many times. But generally, most of these work the same way. This is a drum roaster. There's a drum inside that turns around. You put unroasted coffee into the top, release it into the drum. It turns around here. It gets heated up by a propane flame. On this machine, you can pull out a sample and see how your roast is doing. This is great for people that know what they're doing because they don't have to see it all of the time. New roasters or people like me that aren't so great at this, we want to see it all the time, and so smaller roasters tend to have a glass window, but most larger roasters will have a trier tube, something to pull out a sample and take a look at it. And then when your coffee is ready, you dump it into a cooling tray and cool it down. This is the right size for us because it's small enough that we can do a whole bunch of individual trees, because that's our thing. But it's also big enough that we can keep up with medium-sized orders. Larger orders, we might be roasting multiple batches. But for us, this is the right size, and it's the one we found. So we were very, very fortunate to find it. We're not going to roast coffee on this today because it's noisy, and I don't need to roast a whole bunch. But we are going to roast a little bit on a smaller roaster. And this one you'll be able to see into. And I'll teach you what I know about roasting, although I'm far from an expert, but I get by. So we're going to head over to the smaller machines and roast a little bit of coffee. All right, I got this machine preheating, so it's almost ready to go. That way you don't have to sit there and watch it turn and heat up. When this machine beeps at me in just a moment, I'm going to add our beans. This is green coffee, green beans, and they're kind of green. That's what they look like before roasting. You might notice they're kind of small. As they roast, they're going to get a lot bigger, and that beeping sound means it's time to put the beans in the roaster. So, take the lid off, put the funnel on, going to drop our beans in. And you can hear them sloshing around. These are hot top roasters. A hot top makes, without question, the very best small home roasting machines. And they're great for a demonstration like this because you can see through the window, but they're just extremely well made. We use these for test batches. Actually, it's kind of surprising. Our coffee, even though it's from the same farm, will roast a little differently each year. This gives us a chance to play with next season's coffee to figure out how it's going to roast, because every year it'll be a little different. But mostly we have these machines lined up here because when people come here on coffee tours, they get to roast their own coffee, and this is the perfect machine because it's a little batch for someone to roast their own coffee. Most of these machines are in people's homes for people that like to roast their own coffee just as a hobby. And so right now, there's a drum that's turning around, and it's stirring these beans, and there's a heater in there, and the temperature is rising. And roasting coffee can seem very boring for a very long time, because for a long time, it seems like not much is happening. But then once things start to happen, they start to happen pretty fast. And so we're going to need to decide how dark we want to roast our coffee. Unfortunately, nobody in the world will really agree on what different levels of roast mean. This is the chart we use, and really it just goes from light to dark, and we're going to talk about some of the different flavors that we get in here between them, but really we keep things very simple here. We roast coffee to medium, medium dark, dark, and dark French. Dark French might mean something totally different in Italy. An Italian roast might mean something different in France, but those are the terms we use. No one seems to agree on this. But really, we're talking about how much the coffee has roasted, how dark it is. And there's a lot of things that happen during this process. This is a little chart that shows some of the things that happen during roasting. There's a lot. There are people that are far, far better coffee roasters than myself. People spend a career mastering this. But there's really only a couple things that happen that we really care about. So as this coffee heats up, it will release the moisture that's in it. These are about 10% water. So that is the first thing that'll get released, and then we're going to start to cook the beans. And some of these sugars will caramelize, and there's lots of things that happen, including the Maillard process, which is common for lots of other foods that you cook. But really, these are seeds. And we're going to cook them until they develop enough pressure to expand, kind of like popcorn. When popcorn pops, we call that pops. In coffee, we call these cracks, but it's really not so different. So you have this seed that has a shell on it, and then as we cook this, it starts to develop some gases inside, primarily carbon dioxide. And this builds up some pressure until the point at which it can't contain that pressure anymore, and then the shell of this seed breaks open and cracks, and this is called a crack. The first time it goes through this is called first crack. It's called that because there is a second crack also. It depends on how dark you roast your coffee. This actually sounds a little bit like popcorn also, but more like popcorn that's being cooked in the next room. It's a little subtle. You could miss it if you weren't paying attention. Once you know what it sounds like, it's pretty easy to catch. But yeah, you could definitely miss this if you weren't paying attention. This little machine works the same way our bigger roaster works the same way as very, very large roasters. It's just on a smaller scale. But roasting coffee goes back to long before even electricity. There was a time when this was done on kind of like a wok on an open flame, and you would just stir it until you got the right level of roast. It's a little harder to be consistent that way, but it's definitely doable, and there's a lot of people that roast their own coffee at home. It's kind of surprising, but we do get a lot of requests for unroasted green coffee. And the trees that we lease out to people, every year we'll get a few people that want their coffee green, unroasted, because they want to roast it themselves. But most people are going to want their coffee already roasted, just like most of you buy coffee at the grocery store already roasted. So there are other methods. This is really the top end for home roasting. But you can even do this in a hot air popcorn popper. That works. If you look on YouTube, you'll see a ton of videos on people who roast their own coffee using a popcorn popper. There's a lot of ways to do that, but really this gives us the most consistency and the most control over getting our coffee to turn out the way we want it to. Caffeine. A lot of people think the darker you roast coffee, the more caffeine it has. This is actually opposite. The reality is the green coffee has caffeine in it. The plant made it, and it has the maximum amount of coffee. The more heat we put into this, the more we're going to degrade these caffeine molecules, and so darker roasts will actually have a lower caffeine content than if you didn't roast them quite as much. Kind of a surprise from most people, but that's the reality. The other thing is we start to get a lot of differences in flavor. So when they cup coffee, meaning give it a score, they roast it really, really light, lighter than most of us would ever actually drink coffee. And the idea is that you're tasting only the coffee and not the roast. But most of us want it roasted a little bit darker. As you roast coffee darker, it starts to become less acidic, but a lot more bitter. And sometimes you end up adding a lot of milk and sugar to make up for that. We do get a lot of people here that come visit us. They've been drinking dark coffee most of their lives, and they're kind of surprised at the flavor they get from a little bit lighter roast. Most of the coffee that we sell here is going to be a medium roast or a medium dark. We roast whatever level people like because it's up to them. But many parts of the world that drink really dark coffee are kind of surprised at how much flavor you get from a lighter roast and far less bitter. If we look at our coffee at this point, we can see that it has started to change color a little bit. It has gone from the green that we started with and is kind of a whitish, almost a very, very light brown color now. And that's just part of the roasting process. So once this coffee gets hot enough, it will start to crack open. And the first time that does that, that's called first crack. And we're really going to pay attention to that because that's really the point where most people consider coffee roasted enough to drink. And kind of like popcorn, it starts out with just this occasional pop, 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 and then it gets a little bit more vigorous and more vigorous. And then it starts to slow down a little bit, and that's going to put us at about a medium roast. And then if we wait, there'll be a little bit of a pause, and then we'll go into a second crack, which happens kind of the same way, but it's usually a little more subtle in the sound, the volume. Today we're going to roast to about a medium because that's what I drink in my house, so that's what we're roasting today. But you can take this all the way to really, really dark roast. And if you're not careful, you can take this all the way to fire, which is not what we're looking for under most circumstances. So beans are roasting. They're getting a little more color and a little bit more color. And they're going to crack, and then there's a couple of things that occurred during this. So when we when we're processing coffee, we have to remove many layers of it. The last layer, the one that's closest to the bean, is called silver skin, and it's attached to the bean very, very well. And we try and get most of the silver skin off, but it's hard to get it all off. And so we're going to see some of it floating around in this drum, but also some of it is going to get captured in this tray. Once it's roasted, we call it chaff. I guess just to make things more confusing, but it's really just some silver skin, a little bit of the bean that was stuck to it. So I think I heard the very first pop, and we'll have to pay attention here. It could be easy to miss, especially with the other sounds, but there we go, that's a good one. As we get more and more into the first crack, it'll become more and more vigorous. And like I said, it's not hard to notice once you're used to it, but it could be easy to miss if you're not paying attention. So coffee oil. A lot of people like their coffee really, really dark and coated with oil, and I guess this is a good example. This is a dark French roast. And the beans get quite shiny. So a lot of people think that as you're roasting coffee, you're developing these oils, but the reality is the oil's already in the beans. The more we heat these up, the more we damage the shell and the more the oil comes out. So actually, the darker the roast, the less oil that is going to be in the bean, and the coffee oil is where most of the antioxidants and the great, healthy coffee parts are going to be. So darker roast will probably have less of that because some of it is going to burn off, and we can start to see a little bit of smoke coming off the top of the machine. And this is smoke, just like if you were cooking something like steak. Same kind of idea. So we're still in first crack, but we're going to be dropping these beans when they are about a medium roast. That's what we like to drink in our house. And once this coffee is roasted, we're going to push a button. It will fall down. There's a tray down below, and the beans will fall down into here, and there's an arm that will stir them, and it'll blow cool air over the beans, and we're going to want to cool them off as soon as possible, because kind of like when you take a steak off of the grill, it's still cooking. These beans are going to have a tremendous amount of heat in them, and we want to slow them down as soon as we possibly can. Machine's beeping at us to make sure that there's somebody here. It has hit the temperature at which there's the potential for fire, and if you should not roast coffee unattended. If you leave it in there too long, there is the distinct possibility that all of this stuff becomes more and more volatile and starts to catch fire. Once our coffee drops, we're going to cool it down. That's going to take a few minutes. And this should be very good coffee because we put a lot of work into it. But if you're roasting coffee that has a lot of damage to it, here's our beans falling down into the tray. We can see the tray spinning them and cooling them off. This should be very good coffee because we put a lot of effort into it. But if you have a lot of beans that were damaged by beetles or just didn't grow right or had mechanical damage from processing, they won't roast the same way. And so we're still going to check this coffee at the end to make sure that it's all good. Most of this should be good, but we're still going to give it one more look to make sure we didn't miss anything. We're going to look for anything that's really, really dark or really, really light. This process will take a few minutes. And if we take a look at our chaff tray, we can see, well, it's very hot, but that is the silver skin. Now it's been roasted and it's called chaff. But this is how much the machine removed. We're still going to have to remove a little bit by hand. The larger roaster on the farm has a big vacuum system in it, and it makes this process a lot easier. But on the smaller machines, you have to do this by hand. It's going to take a few minutes to cool down. So we're going to let this cool down, and then we're going to talk about sorting it. So these are the coffee bags we use. We have a couple different sizes. You can't buy coffee bags in Panama. I don't know why, but you just can't. So we ship them in. And we buy coffee bags that have a valve on the backside. You've probably seen this in the grocery store. And for a long time, I thought the real reason for this was so that you could smell the coffee in the grocery store, because that's what I used it for. But then we were roasting coffee, and my wife was getting pretty good at it, actually. She told me to order coffee bags. We were going to give some coffee away for Christmas. And they charge extra for these valves. So being the frugal person that I am, I ordered bags with no valves. So she roasted a whole bunch of coffee, and we bagged it up, and we heat sealed the bags. And then that evening they exploded, because one of the things that happens is these beans developed enough carbon dioxide that they actually cracked the shell of the bean. They're still releasing that carbon dioxide. And if you put them in a sealed container with no way for that gas to escape, it will explode. Be it a paper bag or a glass jar or a metal can, they release quite a bit of this gas. That is actually the real reason for the valve on the back of a coffee bag. It turns out it does allow you to smell the coffee, which is kind of nice. But the real reason is it allows that carbon dioxide to escape. This is actually a good thing, though. So these beans release enough carbon dioxide that they will push virtually all of the oxygen out of the bag. And if you store your coffee with no oxygen, it can't oxidize, which is the process of coffee going stale. So this is actually a really good thing. It means that if you bag your coffee right after roasting, it will displace all of that oxygen, and it will stay fresh for a long time, like many months. If you wait a week and put it in a bag that doesn't have a valve so that it doesn't explode, that saves you about 15 or 20 cents, but it means there's oxygen in with the beans, and that means they're oxidizing, and coffee will start to change pretty fast in the presence of oxygen. In fact, even whole beans, which last a little bit longer, within a couple weeks, that flavor has changed quite a bit, and not for the better. All right, our coffee's roasted. Now we need to figure out what's good. Java's here to supervise, and some of her duck friends have decided to join us in the non-duck area, but that happens. So this is the coffee right out of the roaster. And it looks pretty good, but you're going to see a few things in there that we don't like. The first one is this chaff. And the thing with chaff is it doesn't have any flavor. It doesn't make the coffee taste bad. It just doesn't look good. And we want beautiful coffee, so we want to get rid of this. Now with the larger roaster, this is a lot easier. It has a big vacuum on it. It'll take most of this out. But with smaller roasters, you have to do this by hand. And it turns out the easiest way to do this is to just take a little fan and kind of blow over it and shake the tray. And that's how we get rid of most of this in tiny little batches. Really, we're doing this for samples or for tours, and normally I make tours do this themselves. The other thing we're going to look for is anything that didn't roast correctly. So if something is really, really dark or really, really light, we want to get rid of it because that's not going to taste right. This chaff, this is just cosmetic. But anything that over roasted or under roasted needs to go away. And I'm actually not seeing much here. A lot of this stuff with a lighter color is just some chaff that's still on it. but I don't really see much that's bad. So I'm going to clean this up a little bit more, and then we're going to bag it, and we'll talk about bagging coffee. Jaffa. So our coffee's sorted. It's beautiful. It's perfect. And now we want to package it. This is a half-pound bag. We sell a lot of these, actually. This is about the size people roast when they come here on a tour. And to facilitate this, we have a funnel. We can set our bag underneath and then just pour our coffee into the funnel, and it will all go in there. We could grind this first. Grinding coffee is kind of a point of contention for some folks. Purists will say that coffee should stay in whole bean until right before brewing, and it probably does taste a little bit better that way. But there's also some convenience to grinding it, so I don't really care. However you like it, we sell it both ways, and we'll ship it both ways. But it's the same thing. Goes in a bag, and now we want to heat seal this. So there's a zipper seal on here, and that works okay, but it's not perfect. And so we want to actually melt this bag together, and that's what's going to really seal it and keep it fresh. And the way we do that is with a sealer. So we're going to line up our bag at the very top of this, and then hold the handle down. It will heat this up, and it will melt this bag together. And afterwards, you will not be able to open your bag. It is melted together. And that's what really keeps this fresh. So at this point, carbon dioxide can develop and can displace the oxygen and can leave, but nothing can get back into this. And by the end of the day, this will be full of gas, and that's when you can squeeze it and smell it. But the more important part of that is it will have pushed the oxygen out, and that's going to keep it fresh for a very, very long time. Once you open it, now you have a clock on it, and really you should be drinking coffee probably within a week or two after opening a bag. But if it's been packaged correctly, it will stay fresh like this for many months. That is exactly the process that we do here. We do not have industrial machines that package and seal all of this for us. This is actually how we do it, and this is actually what we would ship to somebody if they ordered it.